All right, I'm here with Jack Register today. How you doing this morning, Jack?
I'm well, thank you. Thanks for inviting me.
Thank you for jumping on this morning. We almost had a miniature podcast before we started the podcast, so I wanted to make sure we hit the record button to really get into all this stuff. But thank you for being here today. Why don't you kind of let the audience know what it is you do and who you
Sure.
are?
Yeah. So I'm Jack Register. I am a clinical social worker and independent addiction counselor. I live in the Phoenix area of Arizona. I have a small private practice and I have been a therapist for, oh gosh, going on about 25, 30 years now. I specialize in working with addiction and mental health issues and the intersections of that. And the primary population I work with is men. I work with a lot of LGBT folks. I also work with some families and some adolescent folks who are really struggling with the consequences of addiction. In my career, I've been an academic. I'm working on finishing my PhD right now. I've also done public policy work around mental health and addiction care and public policy and how we have to fund these kinds of systems to make them all work. So I really am one of those jack of all trades. And that's why I love what I do because I'm able to use all of my skills to help people kind of figure out how to kind of get through the difficulties of life.
Hmm. Yes, Jack Register, the Jack of all trades.
Yeah,
Um, so there's so many different directions we can start, and we've had some conversations before this, but I'm just curious with addictions. First of all, did you start off getting into addictions, or is that something that you developed over time?
yeah. So I actually come from a military family, and I've had more people in my family in the military than not. And I've had a lot of people in my family struggle with the consequences of being in direct combat. So really profound PTSD and whatnot. So addiction is something I grew up in. Um, my father, bless his soul, struggled with alcoholism and mental illness, and my mom, who was also in the military, struggled with mental health issues. And I've had many uncles and aunts and grandparents and whatnot who've all struggled as well. So addiction was a language that I understood from the family point of view, and then trying to figure out what it meant whenever I was in training. So I started my work always wanting to be in the middle. I always told everybody I'm the crossroads person. I want to talk to people who are living with mental health issues, medical concerns, addiction issues, life concerns, who just really don't know how to untangle the knot. So that meant that in my training, I ended up doing a parallel path in both mental health and addiction. So I've been licensed in both since the early, oh my gosh, I think I got my first license in 2002, 2003, something like that. So I've been licensed for a long time, but I've been working in the field uh, probably 5 to 10 years before that. So I find that the language of addiction helps to untangle the beginnings for a lot of people of mental health issues.
Hmm. Okay, so the beginnings of like working through their mental health issues.
Hmm.
Hmm.
Generally, what statistics tell us is that people might start using substances or having addictive behaviors as early as 10 years old, between 10 to 14. And for a lot of folks, addiction might start as a way of covering up the depression or anxiety that they're experiencing. So if you get somebody who's 17 or 18 struggling with being super shy, super anxious, they might use substance as a way of being able to cope with that. And particularly with men, when we don't know what to do, when we don't know how to show up, we tend to use something else as sort of a shield. And for a lot of us, addiction issues are what that shield is, but what's underneath of it is really profound anxiety and depression that, if left untreated, can turn into all kinds of problems.
So the addiction is the veil for the deeper problems going on underneath.
Yes, it's a both and, not an either or.
Hmm. Okay.
Because when somebody gets sober, if they're celebrating and they feel like that they have been reborn, then they didn't have a mental health concern. And that's really rare. If somebody gets sober and all of a sudden they feel like life is worse, then the mental health issues are now front and center and are basically like letting everything out of the box. And so now you have a Pandora's box and it's a hot mess because they don't know what to do with these feelings. They don't know what to do with these concerns. And those are the folks who are at risk for relapsing with the substances because they don't know how to deal with this stuff. And so my job is to really help people through that really hard process once the emotional stuff is out of the bag, as it were, so that they can understand what's really underneath of it. And there's a lot more guys who were traumatized than they would ever admit. And they have early trauma that can be everything from physical and sexual abuse to deprivation to being thrown into the room with no food or water kind of thing. I mean, we have a lot of people who live in really awful situations or went through awful situations and then just kind of like, well, it is what it is, and that's what life threw at me, and I'm just supposed to deal with it. We're not supposed to live in hell. That's not how life is supposed to work. And when you're a kid who lives in hell, you think that's normal.
Mhm.
So that means you grow up and you bring hell with you to your life as normal. And that's how generational patterns of chaos get created. And so, for a lot of the guys I work with, when we really start addressing some of the generational patterns, there's like this light bulb that goes off in his eyes. And suddenly he realizes he's living his grandfather's life, his father's life versus his own. And when we start to really do the work of turning that off and allowing people to live their own life and live in their own space, it starts to change everything.
Hmm. And how do they start? How do you start to do that? Like, so
Yeah.
if you're used to living in hell when you're a child, you take that to your adulthood. How do you, where do you even
Yeah.
start with that?
So we start with the idea of the behavior patterns. How are you showing up in the world that looks and feels familiar? Because I talk a lot about the idea that what are called schemas of behavior, or basically blueprints of behavior that get learned early on. So, for example, if you're a little guy who's 3 or 4 years old and you fall down and dad just screams at you and tells you to stop being such a baby, boys don't cry, and picks you up and throws you against the wall, the message is really clear for you. Men don't cry, men do not show feelings, right? But men are allowed to show aggression. So
Mhm.
then when you're 8 years old and your little brother does the same thing, you might treat him the same way,
Mhm.
right? So you've now inculcated that idea that violence is normal and men don't show emotion. Well, by the time you're 25 years old, you might do that to your wife, you might do that to your own kid. And so now you've replicated the pattern. When you start to unwind that in really safe space and help people understand, there's a lot of things that you do that are unconscious that you learned, and it's okay to stop. Well, when guys really understand the weight of that, especially if he's a dad, especially if he's had issues with being able to contain his anger, suddenly he realizes that his anger is not just his. I do a lot of work around anger management. That's usually how a lot of men might show up for me, because it might be a combination of addiction, anger management issues, or whatever. And one of the first things I ask him is, how much like the men in your life, the men in your family, is your behavior showing up? And a lot of guys get scared because they suddenly realize they became the monster under the bed that they were terrified of at 6.
Mhm.
And so I help them understand that you don't have to stay there. You don't have to continue to do that. You can change that and change the pattern for your family. And moving to a conscious sort of orientation versus an unconscious reaction. So I challenge guys a lot to tell me when they say, well, I'm just tired and I'm just frustrated. I'm like, okay, so that's a label. Tell me what that really means. And they're like, I don't know what the hell to tell you. I don't know what you want from me. And I'm like, yeah, you do. You just don't want to share it because that means opening up further. You can't give me superficial answers and think you're going to get through this. You have to bust through the wall and you got to be vulnerable. Most guys are terrified. We're terrified of not performing. We're terrified of failing. We're terrified of hurting somebody. We're terrified of not showing up in the way we're supposed to and having people judge us that way. And so men lock themselves down in these roles in our lives, whether it's through work, family or whatever of trying to be something we can't be. And no wonder we have guys having heart attacks by the time they're 50 or dying right after retirement because they basically have burned themselves out from the inside out trying to be Superman for 45, 50 years, and it doesn't work.
Right. So something that can't be being, yeah, like the Superman that doesn't have emotion, doesn't
Right.
show anything, and is just strong all the time. And
Yeah. And this
the
is counter to a lot of what a lot of people will say is like, the John Wayne Stoic kind of guy, the American grit kind of guy, if you're in the States, or the guy who's supposed to be this way, right? People talk about
yeah.
being an alpha male. I
Yeah.
honestly had a client recently, 25 years old, had more muscles than Carter got liver pills and was so lonely. And I looked at him and I said, "How's your alpha male going for you?" He goes, "Well, at least I'm strong." And I said, "Yeah, but you're alone."
Hmm.
I said, "I might look like Winnie the Pooh, but I got a house and I got a person in my house who loves me and I have people around me who want to be with me, right? If
Yeah.
you're jacking yourself up to be super strong, but you're shutting out the world, what are you protecting yourself from?"
Hmm.
Right? And we have a toxic male culture that says men are not allowed to feel. And that is utter and total bullshit. And it kills more men than anything else. Suicide rates, addiction rates, violence rates with men are ridiculous because guys believe that they have to be something that they're not.
Hmm. Do you think this is more of just like a general question, but do you think this is kind of getting worse than it was, say, 20, 30 years ago? Um, Maybe not even the idea that men should be strong and not emotional, but it seems like isolation has gotten worse amongst men. I'm just
Oh,
curious if
absolutely.
you've seen that.
Absolutely. I think that we've all become keyboard warriors, and it's easy to sit behind a keyboard when somebody's being vulnerable and shows something online. Like, most of us, when we're 12, 14 years old, we want other guys to look at us and say, "Hey, man, you're cool. You're awesome. You're doing great." Well, what we get now is we get people who basically say, "Oh my God, you're the dumbest ass thing I've ever seen. You're so stupid. Why don't you just go kill yourself?"
Yeah,
Right?
yeah,
The
yeah.
messaging that teenagers get and that young kids get is so vile. And one of the things I say to parents a lot, I'm a kid of the 80s. I understand that I'm older than the internet, and I understand I'm a little further down life's path than some folks. But when I was a kid, there were maybe 50 people in the universe who had a direct impact on how I saw myself. And these were the kids I went to school with. These were the kids who were in my everyday circle. So if I had a goofy pair of shoes or if I didn't comb my hair or whatever, I had about 50 people who would witness that. Now, a kid has the entire planet because as soon as somebody puts something online, it's there permanently. So if in the sixth grade somebody takes a video of you of having a really rough day and your hair looks stupid and you're not wearing the right shoes or whatever and laughs at you and bullies you, that's permanently out there.
Mhm,
So kids are having to develop coping strategies that older folks never even thought about.
mhm,
And while we think that people have the capacity to not be online all the time, think about how much of our world is so integrated into the internet. And we say to folks, you have a choice. No, they don't. By the time kids are 10, they've had more screen time than I will have in my entire life.
mhm,
And so we have to think about what does it mean to be a digital citizen as opposed to a regular citizen? And how does it mean to be an international global citizen from the jump? So we have
mhm,
to teach kids skills. And that also means, and this is my grandmother and my grandfather coming out, we have to pour into kids more self-love, more ideas that you belong to a family, you are amazing. And that means that for kids who don't have dads, for kids who don't have families, the community has to do that. So I have godchildren, I have nieces and nephews, And I have all the students that I've worked with over the years, and I firmly believe that my job is to look a little bit like Yoda. My job is to pour into all of these Jedi who are trying to make it in the world all the things that they may not have gotten because they didn't have people in their life. And older folks have to remember that they have a job as an elder. And if you are an elder in a family and you're not taking care of the generations behind you, then you're doing your family a disservice,
Hmm.
because it's the replication of this toxic culture that makes things worse. So if I'm in my 50s and I have nothing to do with the folks in my family, whether they like me or don't like me, I'm not giving them anything to hold on to prepare themselves. I'm sure that there are 14 or 15-year-olds who think that I'm ridiculous. Sure, but I can also help them figure out how to deal with life and maybe not make some of the same mistakes that I made.
Right.
The adage, we are our brother's keeper, is more important now than ever.
Right. Yeah. It seems like we're more isolated in how isolated from friends because we're always on the internet, but also more isolated maybe from our family as well.
Absolutely. I used to do an experiment where I would ask folks, name 3 neighbors within 2 miles of you. Most people can't do that.
Yeah.
But I was asked them, who are the 3 people that you would call at 2 o'clock in the morning if things were going crazy? And most people would call people halfway across the planet.
Hmm.
So there's no sense of community anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. And you must find a difference. Like I know I did because I was just a kid in the early 2000s stuff, but like with community even back then, it was much different, I found.
Yeah. Yeah. Even in training, like I'm working on my doctorate right now, and my experience as a doctorate student is very different than my experience as an undergrad, where we were in coffee houses, all of us doing our homework together, hanging out together. And when I was in my undergrad in the 90s, there was just a different world. I mean, it was like people took care of each other. Um, the entire dorm floor hung out. I had more guys that I'm connected to from those days than I did from my master's program or even now, because I trust those folks because they were the ones who showed up for me, all of those years ago. And I think many folks don't have those experiences. And so trying to find ways of intentionally building community is really important. But that means being vulnerable,
Yeah.
right? One of the first lessons I teach folks or we work through are what are called core messages. What are the core messages you received as you became who you are? And core messages are, what does it mean to be you? What does it mean to think and feel and understand the world the way that you do? And it might be that somebody said to you one time, you're really smart at putting things together. You really have an eye for that. Well, that becomes a core message that people remember. But the opposite is also true. You're the dumbest person I've ever met. Well, if you say that to somebody long enough, they actually believe it,
Yeah.
right? And so I'll ask people, who gave you that message? Because if it was another kid, what do they know about who you are as a person, right?
Yeah.
I remember growing up with a military parent. Whenever I was in wrestling, it was not about being in the sport. It was about hurting people and dominating them. And I used to have parents, whenever they found out that their kid was going to wrestle me, they'd pull them out of the match because my dad got so like, you will win, you will do this, that I turned into the freaking Incredible Hulk.
Yeah.
And I was not there to learn the sport, I was there to hurt people. And the shift for me came whenever I finally realized that there's always someone bigger, there's always someone meaner, and there's always someone stronger. And I got hurt. And when I got hurt, my dad basically walked away. And I was like, what the hell? And it took a while for me to understand that that's not the way I want to be. Being the strongest guy in the room is not going to keep you safe. being the guy who can connect with people in the room will keep you safe.
Right. What did you hurt, by the way? Did you hurt your head or your
I got put
spine?
into a Saturday night special, which basically tore muscles in my back because you
Oh,
get put
geez.
into this weird bridge sort of thing. And then your legs get kind of pulled underneath of you in a way where you basically get turned into a human pretzel.
Oh,
Now, wrestling in the 80s was very different than wrestling is today. And the rules are were a little bit lax back then. And so things were allowed to happen in wrestling that would not be allowed today. Um, I'm thankful I had that experience, but I'm also now very thankful that I'm not in that because who I was is not who I wanted to be.
hmm.
So whenever I go to the gym now as somebody who's in his 50s trying to exercise, I have reminders of there's only so much you can do. You got to listen to your body because if you don't, you're going to pay for it.
Hmm. Right. So deconstructing these like core messages that you received and sort of this unconscious, I don't know if you'd say persona or behavior patterns. Would you say this is
Hmm.
kind of like the main or the core thing that you work on with men when they come to you? These things are like the main
Yeah,
things.
honestly, it's generally where we start, and that takes a lot of the initial core work. But we then move into who do you want to be? And let's become the construction crew for creating the version of you that you want to be. So there's some theoretical thinking around narrative theory where you get to kind of become who you want to be. You get to construct that yourself. So my job is to help guys become the author of their own life. You can borrow things from the past, you can borrow things from other men, but it's up to you to construct who is it you want to show up as. So I talk to folks about what is your value system, what's important to you, how do you want that to show up in your life? Because you can simply say, I believe X, Y, and Z, but if you're not living it, then you don't really believe it. And so it's about how do we give people permission to let go of what's not working, to bring in the things that they do want to have so they can show up and be the kind of men that they really want to be. That's generally the second half of the work I do with folks. Once they get to a place of being conscious and stable and healthy again, which takes sometimes a little bit of work. We're not the labels of who we are. We're not the labels of our past. We're not the labels of our illnesses. We are a combination of all of that all the time, constantly creating personality that goes out into the world. And if you don't like who you are, you can just rewrite it. So the way that shows up is somebody who wants to be less angry. We talk about the role that anger has in your life. We name it. Make anger be a person in your life that you're in relationship with. Why is it keeps showing up? Why is it he keeps spending your money? Why does he keep screwing up your relationships? Find out what's underneath of it because anger is a protective emotion. It means that you have something in your life you have expectations of that are not being met. And oftentimes that anger is very old. And that's the reason why it's so big. So people who are super protective, people who thought that the world was going to be different, tend to show up as angry when they don't know what else to do.
Hmm.
So as men, it's a natural thing for us to want to protect our family, to protect our identity, to be a good person in the world. Well, good. So go chop wood and carry water and build something for the community. And that doesn't mean necessarily literally. Be somebody who's supporting the community, who's holding the community together, as opposed to the person who is burning it down.
Hmm. Right.
There's a really old adage. I think it's an African proverb that says the child who was not raised by the village will stand there and watch the village burn. And part of what I believe about that comes from Joseph Campbell when he talks about the hero's journey. Men must have the father blessing in order to know that they are a good man. Most of us in today's world never got that blessing from our father because he never got it from his. And so we go into the world trying really hard not to be like dad because dad was not the kind of man I wanted to be. And we end up coming full circle and becoming just like him and treating our own son the same way we were treated.
Could you talk a little bit more about the father blessing? Is that something that Joseph Campbell wrote about?
Yeah, and Hero with a Thousand Faces, he talks about the idea that in order to really understand who you are, you have to go on a quest as a young person. And that many cultures across the planet have rituals and traditions where we basically take a young kid and we put him through rituals and whatnot of our particular culture that help him understand that he is now officially a man. So that means whether he joins the hunting party, whether he goes and does particular things, but there is a way in which the community blesses him and says, we now see you as a man and you're no longer a kid,
Right,
right?
right, right.
And so we treat you differently. Well,
Mhm.
in Western culture and in American culture in particular, we don't do that.
Yeah.
We just expect folks to suddenly magically at 18 years old know how to manage his life. We expect kids to be able to manage their emotions when they've never been shown how. We expect folks to be able to not make the mistakes of other generations when we've never given them the tools to do so. And when the kid looks at us and says, screw you and all of this is not okay with me. I'm going to go live my life. We get mad at them because they're not respectful.
Mhm.
You can't honor a history that tried to kill you.
Mhm.
And that's the problem is that we are in a world that is technologically more advanced than it's ever been. And we have more knowledge in our phones now than people had in the entire planet 300 years ago. And yet we are less connected, less knowledgeable, less able to build than we've ever been. And we expect young people today to be able to be okay with that and to be thankful that this is where things are when nothing makes freaking sense.
Mhm.
So
Right.
no wonder young men are pissed off. No wonder they're showing up with substance use issues or they're checking out and becoming addicted to video games and sitting on the couch for 30 hours, a day kind of thing in mom's basement. No wonder folks basically are like, I don't want to participate because this is not okay with me.
Mhm. That kind of reminds me, as a side note, just in a developmental psychology class, there's a new category of like it goes from adolescent. It used to go right to adult. Now there's a new category called young. I think it's young adult, and that's
Yep.
from I think it's
Yep.
18 and 19 to
Or
like 28 or
sometimes
something.
called emerging adult.
Emerging adult. That's what it is. Yeah.
Yeah. And the emerging adult is someone who's still trying to figure out what's the difference between being an adolescent and being an adult. They're
Yeah.
trying out roles, they're trying out different things, and they might have different levels of independence. This is sort of like what the undergraduate experience is really like for a lot of folks because it's the time you eat ramen noodles, sleep on couches or whatever, stay up until 3 a.m. and still have to get up for class. That's the traditional model of an emerging adult. Well, in today's world, you got to work. You got to do all of that stuff plus work and actually try and take care of yourself financially because most people don't have access to be able to be that undergraduate student who doesn't work, who just goes to school, right? Most people
Yeah.
don't have capacity, so they're jumping straight into an economic workforce requiring so much of them and they're busting their asses because they have to work two jobs sometimes just to make it while they're trying to get a degree, and in some cases have a family. And so things are moving so fast that people are doing the work of just surviving while they're also trying to grow.
Hmm.
And that's insane.
Hmm.
There's
Yes.
no space to reflect.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And it seems like the that like kind of coupled with the non-initiation it's just kind of a
Yeah.
cluster. You know what I mean? Like you're not initiated,
Yes.
you're just in, and then you got to do all this stuff.
Yes. And the hard part is that men who are older can see this happening. We see this happening to young folks, and instead of helping, giving pointers, making things easier, we get mad at them. We shut them out saying, y'all are disrespectful, y'all don't care. Right? Back in my day, we had to walk uphill 9 miles in snow.
Yeah.
Right? It's like this idea that suffering as a man is a rite of passage, and that is such crap. What I try and do, and I'm just as guilty of this as anybody else who is a little older, is I tend to lapse into stories of what it was like for me. But what I try really hard to do is to say, how can my experience make things easier for you? So I firmly believe it is my responsibility when I can to reach behind me and grab a hold of somebody and bring them up. So if that means that I'm mentoring, if that means I'm helping someone with their resume, if that means I'm helping someone rewrite something, I do a lot of um, professional kind of development stuff for new folks who are trying to deal with licensing boards and passing exams kind of stuff. Um, and so I believe it's part of my responsibility to help people figure out how to show up in a healthy way, how to negotiate contracts in a business world that doesn't really feel like it's going to honor you for who you are.
Mm.
And that's really what I believe. That's where the sea change starts to happen, is that we truly start connecting in real ways with each other and stop judging folks behind keyboards.
Mhm. Yeah. 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 It's just such a night and day difference to actually connect with somebody in person than to,
Yes,
you know,
yes, absolutely.
interact on a Facebook comment or just see that so and so has an Instagram picture or something. Like just actually develop a relationship in person is
Yes.
completely different.
And technology is great. I'm really glad we have it. It's changed the world in a lot of ways, in a lot of really wonderful, beautiful ways. But we have to remember that humans need both and not either.
Mhm. Right. Yeah. Okay. If if you had to boil it down, what what kind of broad stroke advice could you give to men that are struggling that want to change their life?
Yeah, I would say that I go back to whenever I was doing my own healing work, the thing that I wanted more than anything was to be seen and heard and understood. I wanted other men, older men, to see me, to see the pain that I was in, because I didn't understand what was going on around me. I didn't understand what was expected of me. I didn't understand how to be. And I felt like I was constantly trying to prove myself to people who didn't give a damn about what I was doing. And so being seen and heard and understood means that at times in my office or even online with a client, the silence stays there for a second. And I look at him and I'm like, whatever's happening right now for you is okay, even if you don't understand what's happening.
Mhm.
And I might say, to a guy who suddenly starts to finally break through and feel some really intense emotion, I'm like, dude, you're safe here. It's fine. I got you. Right. And when a grown man knows that another man really has his back and he can let go, it changes everything.
Mm.
And that for me is perhaps one of the greatest gifts of my career is being able to bear witness to somebody being in pain and know that he had somebody there with him who truly saw him in that moment,
Mm.
right? I had a mentor say one time that it is not my job to save people from their feelings. and from their experiences. It's my job to walk beside of them and to remind them that they are not alone in this experience. Because we need the pain to help us grow. That's where a lot of us find the strength to break through whatever it is that we need to break through is through the pain of whatever's going on right now. So someone taking that from you takes your God-given right to grow. But you need people beside of you on the sidelines going, hey, I believe in you. I see you. You can do this, and it's going to be okay. And this shows up for me a lot when I work with younger men and I talk to some of these kids who've been through things I can't even fathom that a human being would have to experience. And I'm talking to a 12 or 14-year-old
Yeah.
who's telling me like, you know, food was never normal in their life, safety was never normal in their life. And I'm like, how did you get through that? And they're like, I don't know. And I'm like, I really am thankful that you were willing to share that with me today and that you're willing to even be present to the idea that that doesn't have to be your future.
Mm.
How can we build supports around you so that you never experience that again?
Mm.
I have friends of mine who are uh, active duty soldiers of all different kinds who would say that sometimes war is needed to help a man figure out who he's supposed to be. And I look at them and say, I work with people every day who are at war, who've never put on a uniform.
Mm.
And that's the problem in our world is that we live in such a violent culture. We live in such a violent society that believes competition is the only way to do things, that we must either kill or be killed, that it is Nightmare on Elm Street. And I look at them and say, maybe I'm Pollyanna, but I actually more like am Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. I really believe that Sesame Street is a thing, that there's plenty of light, that there's plenty of space, and no matter what kind of kid you are, you're welcome on Sesame Street. And the older folks on Sesame Street always welcome the younger ones, and there was always help, and that no one had to go through life on their own.
Right.
And that's how we shift the culture, I believe, for everyone, so that we have different spaces for people to grow up in, is to just remember that we're all in this together and nobody gets out of this alive.
Right.
So if I invest in you and you invest in me, the world is a little bit better place and we can both get through this and feel better about who we are.
Right. It kind of makes me think of like how our culture is. It's kind of like hyper individualism.
Oh my gosh.
Um,
Yes. Yes.
and it's not even like that. A lot of people talk about like the Eastern cultures, how they're like collectivist, and they say like maybe that's better. But at the very least, like we're more individualistic. I think the thing that's missing is connection, right? Like connection to the community and family and all that stuff. Like we've talked about.
Yes.
Um,
Yes.
yeah,
You
because
know,
it's
I,
yeah,
and in psychology, we talk a lot about circles of influence, right? And that if you really understand where the influence is coming from, and I do this work a lot with folks, it's like I draw circles and say, who are the 10 people in your life who influence you the most? Most folks now can't name 10 actual individuals, but what they'll name is 10 websites or they'll name 10 apps, right?
yeah,
And I'm like, imagine if you could just for 1 minute take and remove three of those apps and put a human being there, right? The
mm,
person you see at the gym, the guy on the bus whenever you're headed to work, the person at the coffee shop who always remembers what your coffee is like, right? So if we start replacing the 10 places that we always go to figure out who we are with actual humans, So we start having relationships, then things start to shift.
Mhm. Right. Um, maybe maybe just kind of starting to wrap up. The I just wanted to ask about specifically being seen and heard, understood um, by men in particular, like men being seen and understood by other men. Could you talk to us
Hmm.
a little bit about why that is important, or why you've seen that that is so
Yeah.
important?
For me, it's really about the idea that when I understand someone and I see him, I don't have to compete with him. I don't have to dominate him. I can be in community with him because his needs may not necessarily be the same thing that my needs are, but I don't have to take him out at the kneecaps and remove him from the game in order for both of us to be successful. And when we focus on connecting versus competing, we start the conversation differently. Now, I'm all for competition is a good thing in a lot of ways, and we all need that in terms of sports and all that kind of thing. And so I'm not anti-competition. I'm anti-competition in terms of I have to win no matter what, even if it costs you your ability to be safe in the world, right? Back in the day when I was a kid, and that's one of those back in the day stories when we did things in the playground, it's okay to be the kid who gets to the top of the pyramid if you remember that tomorrow you may not be that kid. And that we really are responsible to each other. And the world is not a healthy place if people are suffering. My faith traditions, everything that I believe about the world says, I am responsible for you as much as you're responsible for me. And I cannot be safe and okay if you're not safe and okay.
Mhm.
And that's really where this comes out of for me is that it's an expression of what I truly believe through my faith the world is supposed to be like.
Mhm.
And no one human has the answer. It is only through the collective wisdom together that we're actually able to make any kind of systemic change.
Mhm. Right. Mhm. Okay. Well, maybe that's a good place to end, Jack. I just want to say
Yeah.
thank you very much for sharing all this
Yeah,
wisdom.
man. Yeah, I really appreciate it. It's been great being with you, and I apologize for the dogs in the background. They're
Oh,
being
no
goofy
worries.
this morning.
Couldn't even hear them at all.
Probably there's probably bunny rabbits or something in my yard. Um, but it's been great to be with you.
Thank you very much. Likewise. So do you do online therapy? Like, can people look and
I do.
find your stuff?
Yeah, so I'm licensed in several states, but I also do some coaching work for folks in places where I'm not licensed. The best way to figure out where I am and what's up with me is to go to my website for my practice, which is catharsis-center.com. Or you can always just drop me an email, and that's jack at catharsis-center.com.
Okay. And I'll put that somewhere in the description of this video. But thank
Cool.
you very much, Jack. Thanks for coming
Yeah, man.
on and
Take
sharing. I
care.
really appreciate it. You too. Thank you.